Hello and welcome to the ILTV Podcast. I'm Maayan Hoffman, Executive Editor of ILTV, and we're so happy to be back with our viewers and our listeners. I have with me today professional basketball player Jared Armstrong, who has made it his mission to fight hate and build peace through the power of sport. Welcome, Jared.
Hey, Maayan, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Now, I want to get started. You have said that basketball has been your best friend since you were 3. When did you go from a hobby to having this become your life's mission?
Yeah, basketball for me started like many other kids. Shooting in a trash can. My mom instilled basketball in me. She's actually in the Philadelphia Hall of Fame for basketball. So since I was 3, it's always been my ethos, my outlet, my way to, provide me a free education, going to college. So it's always been that place for me, where anything's going good or bad in my life that I can always lean on it, to make me feel better. That's always been my sanctuary.
Wow. Now, but you've battled a lot, injuries, rejection, and even bureaucracy, especially we'll talk about that later when it comes to Israel. So what has been able to keep you going through all of that?
I think for me, it's always been my mindset. My parents really instilled in me at an early age, like to never give up, to always dream big, and that what you want in life come with sacrifices. And that, the biggest lesson is that God will never put you through something that, that he doesn't think you can handle. So, through all my life journeys, through the ups and downs, I always looked at those messages and it reminded me that, God's going to test you before he's going to bless you. And it's going to, show that, to see how bad you want it. So that's kind of how I always use that as my mantra.
Wow, and you certainly have connected specifically to the Jewish faith, but you did grow up in Philly. Now, if understand correctly, you live in Ashkelon most of the time, which is just minutes away from the Gaza border. When you stop and think about that, how wild does it feel? Tell me a little bit about this journey from Philly to Ashkelon.
Yeah, I mean, I've been playing basketball in Israel for almost 4 years now. I played in a a lot, but I mean, Ashkelon was obviously somewhere dear in my heart where obviously everything went on during 10/7. So, a lot of people don't know, but my dad was in 9/11. He was in the Pentagon when it got bombed. So it's crazy to be a son, that almost lost their father to terrorism and then to look at it now and he could have almost lost me to terrorism. So for me, it's just, I don't know, an ideological moment, but, I always tried to just learn how to give back during that tough time, which is what we did. We also had a great season. So for me, it was just all about trying to make impact both on and off the court.
For sure. And your story about fighting for Israeli citizenship, however, moved a lot of people. What made you keep pushing when others might have just walked away and said, they don't want me in Israel? I'm not going to stay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for first and foremost, it all starts with Joey Lowe. Everybody I always give him credit. He's a guy that, stood up for me and put his name on the line and his connections on the line. But second of all, I think it was bigger than me. It was about, my legacy, my family. What if I have had kids that want to come to Israel? I would just be known as the guy that, came, tried to get citizenship and quit. So it was more so always bigger than me and bigger than the mission of just, thinking about myself. So for me, it was just honestly just not quitting, not wanting to give up, just living through those mantras. And it was a tough time. It was a tough journey. I wouldn't trade it for the world looking back at it now because I learned so much, not only about myself, but perseverance, adversity. And honestly, it could have been my biggest blessing. I mean, so much good things that I've done since, fighting for Israeli citizenship, from renovating courts to, helping thousands of kids, during a tough time. So, sometimes they say some of your biggest pieces of adversity turn out to be your biggest blessings.
For sure. And I know we talk a lot about that here in Israel, as you know, with after October 7th, 2 years of such a long war. And we were just waiting and hoping to see that moment, that silver lining that comes out of these 2 tragic years. Going back to your own story, though, with that, you tell me a little bit about why you had to fight so hard to get that citizenship. I know that you converted to Judaism. And then also just describe that moment that you finally held that Israeli passport.
Sure, yeah. I mean, mostly it was People don't know my family has a synagogue in Philly that's 80 years old. So my Jewish lineage goes back really, really far. But the problem is like my family's synagogue that I grew up in is a non-denominational synagogue, which is typical in America. You know, they just don't identify with any form, conservative, reform, Orthodox. So I grew up very strict, very Jewish. And then once I met my rabbi, the way that we did things was basically the conversion process wasn't in his eyes needed. It was just a formality that would basically satisfy the Israeli government, which a lot of people doesn't know that's a normal thing for many family members that don't have, documentation of their whether grandmother, grandfather. It just basically gives them a certificate that basically says they're Jewish. And I think what was baffling about the whole situation was when we did the conversion process, we had to do it on Zoom. So they didn't accept the fact that we did the conversion process on Zoom when it was COVID, and they were doing in Israel, they were doing conversions on Zoom. So it was kind of, I think, for me, a little bit of discrimination. But listen, there's racist people or individuals in every government. So for me, it wasn't like a scratch on my back. It was just the fact that I put in all this work and I actually grew up Jewish and they didn't believe me. So that's kind of basically how I felt. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's past me now. I use it I'm sure my story has inspired millions of other people who may be going in the same situation or going through a tough time. But I just look at it as, something that checked off on my bucket list and that I can use to a story to, tell kids the adversity that I went through.
For sure. And then going back to that feeling of holding that Israeli passport for the first time, can you tell me in a sentence what that was like?
It was refreshing. I remember going in that day, and the lady's like, "Who are you going to play for, Maccabi Tel Aviv?" And I'm not saying anything to her. And I called Joey Lowe as soon as I got out of the Tel Aviv municipality, and I remember rushing over to his house, and basically we just gave each other a big hug and smiled, and I thanked him, and it was really just a full circle moment because we had put in so much work. I was living in Tel Aviv in a hostel with 12 other people in the room. So it was just a lot of sacrificing, for that one moment. When I got home, I took my rabbi out, we went to lunch and we cheered and smiled and it was just a full circle moment, honestly.
For sure. And then there's been so much, unfortunately, that's happened in this country since then to make that even more challenging. And as we're going to talk about, you've really played a key role in helping to make it easier for people. But I do want to ask how it's been being both an African American and a Jew, shaped, I mean, does it shape the way you see the world and the way, I guess, as you mentioned, that the world sees you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's always pros and cons, on both sides. I think for me, I get a different perspective. I grew up partly in the suburbs. I went to a lot of independent school growing in my life. So being a minority, so understanding what it's like to be the outside in the room, not only Jewish, but also Black, and then moving to Philadelphia and living in the inner city, and, being around people that are my own skin color and how they think, how they move, what they think about what's going on. How can I be, a positive light or positive impact or, give them the right information. So I think, it's always a plus. It's a double-edged sword. I'm on it, but for me, I just look at it as someone that I'm different and, I can give perspective that, most people can't.
Yeah. And here, as I mentioned, you moved to Ashkelon because that's where you were playing basketball. And that is an area that sits really close to the Gaza border, not in the kibbutzim, but certainly nearby. It has been relatively quiet in the south as we're battling in Gaza, of course. But you lived there when we were under quite a bit of direct rocket fire as well. You've talked about the rockets literally falling on your head. Tell us about that and what do people abroad not really understand?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember the day vividly because we had a scrimmage the night before. The day before, I'm sorry, it was a Friday, and my coach called me around 6:30 in the morning, and he's like, "Jared, there's going to be some rockets that come in," and I never experienced it because I was mainly playing in the center or the north of Israel.
Which
Um,
this time now has had many rockets, but back then I guess it was an anomaly.
yeah, so basically, I kind of just shrugged it off what he was saying, like, I'm not worried about it, whatever. And around 9 o'clock, that's when, things started to take off. And then around 9:45, like a rocket hit across the street, like it landed across the street and just hear a big boom. So I kind of became, in panic mode. Like I was moving around my living room trying to figure out, obviously what I'm going to do. I never had experienced something like this before. And I literally, all of our teammates lived in one building. So I literally went downstairs, knocked on his door. He happened to be asleep. And we're just trying to figure out like how we can go to safety because we knew, Ashkelon was the next city over, if anything was to happen or if they was to get, close to us. So, we ended up taking a risk. We drove from Ashkelon all the way to Ramat HaSharon, where I had a dear friend. I remember police stopping us vividly and they were just asking us like, where are you headed? Like you need to get there and don't come out your house. So it was really just us trying to get to safety and try to save ourselves and make it home safely to the United States.
Yeah. Now, you could have gone home full time after October 7th. Obviously, you are an American citizen, as you said, but instead you actually stayed here a lot and started helping kids on the ground. What moment or conversation sparked that decision that told you, I could just leave today, but instead I want to give back to Israel?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we all ended up going home for a little short stint. The season ended up resuming around after Thanksgiving time. So I remember I hadn't been with my family for Thanksgiving for almost 10 years, just from college and playing in Israel. So I remember after Thanksgiving Day, my agent called me. And he was like, the season's resuming. What you want to do? And I decided to go back. And when I went back, I felt it was a need. A lot of kids weren't in school, a lot of kids didn't have an opportunity to really have any physical activity. So I felt like, bringing Jab Camp to Israel, which we did, a lot of kids were able to be impacted. We ended up renovating the court in honor of my nonprofit's name. So I think it was just a lot of things that came just through my dear heart of just always just want to give back to the community because, for me, it's like, how do you want to be remembered? Do you only want to be remembered as a basketball player? You want to be remembered as someone that did more and was a humanitarian and look back for his community. And I think that's what the kids are going to appreciate most, not just me putting the ball in the hoop or playing for their city, but what I did to actually get back to them to make an impact.
And JAB Camp, I'm assuming, stands for Jared Armstrong Basketball Camp. And what kind of kids went to that? These were kids that were living in the South or had been evacuated from the South?
Yeah, so we ended up doing 5 clinics. One, we partnered with Reebok and we did a 3-on-3 tournament. For our clinics, we were getting kids all throughout the South, Ashdod, Ashkelon, some in the kibbutzim. And then we ended up finishing the year with a 3-on-3 tournament with the Reebok and the Steinhardt Foundation. And that brought kids from all throughout the South. So we were able to impact over 500 kids in a really short amount of time. And I saw the momentum go and that it was really a need, obviously, what was going on with the war.
And how do you see sports then in general helping Israeli kids heal from war? Do you think it can play a key role?
Yeah, I think sports in general, provides so many life lessons, number one, but number two, it builds so many bridges, organically. I always tell people in any interview that, I play with, people that don't look like me all the time, but we always have to find a way to win, which is the common goal through sports. Whether that's teamwork, whether that's respect, whether that's understanding each other, getting to know each other off the court, which builds chemistry. So I think there's a lot of positive life lessons that come through sport. Sports unite people from all around the globe. I mean, if you look at basketball and soccer in Israel, all those people aren't, from the country, but they come together, they figure out a way, how to win. So I think not only just that aspect, but the physical activity, the health benefits that kids get through playing sports every day, and the youth development that comes with it. So I think sports honestly can solve a lot of problems and a lot of issues. And, we're seeing that analytics and data with Jab Camp and what we're building both here in America and in Israel.
We really should get maybe one of these 3-on-3 tournaments going with like Prime Minister Netanyahu, maybe the head of, I don't know, the Palestinian Authority, see what we can do, as we're talking about Middle East peace so much, but we haven't actually seen it come to fruition. So yeah, maybe you could play a role in that. It would be helpful to all of us.
Great.
Yeah. Now, I know that as part of this, you met some pretty traumatized kids. Like, for example, Ariel Zohar, whose entire family was actually murdered on October 7th. And he came, if I understand, to your camp. What do moments like that teach you about resilience?
Yeah, so I didn't actually get a chance to meet Ariel. I just happened to be in the United States and I heard his story, and I wanted to make a special video tribute to his family, which I didn't know ended up getting. I knew it got millions of views, but I mean, it got like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 from what I've been told because I don't have TikTok. But, I was just told by a lot of players, I always get players before we would play. They would stop me and just thank me, like, thank you for everything you're doing for Israel. Your video touched me. Your video made me cry. So I don't even know if the kid ever seen the video. I just know that it reached, a lot of people and people felt dear to his heart. So I just know he was a basketball player, and I related to him because I go on morning runs. So I couldn't imagine, coming home and my family's gone. So that moment, again, through sports, really touched me and I was able to relate to his journey, from going to a morning run to, your parents being gone. So I'm hopeful that I can meet him one day. That hopefully I can just give him a hug and, be a guidance in any way and form that I can. But, the video was just dear to my heart and I was able to, hopefully touch not only him, but bring his story to awareness and what's going on in Israel.
Yeah, and it's such a tragic story. And in general, I mean, as you've said, one of your goals is to fight hate through sports, not just hate here in Israel, not just to help people heal, but in general. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and how you view that working?
Yeah, I mean, I think most importantly, a lot of people live in a bubble. I don't think that just in Israel, but I think that around the globe. I think more people live in a bubble now than ever since, obviously what's going on in America politically and what's going on in Israel. So I think there's a lot of families, parents that don't feel comfortable, with their kids, being around other kids that they don't know. And I think that's a huge problem, nowadays. I think a lot of parents are going to have to think outside the box. And I think that's where Jab Camp comes and plays a major role. For us, we've had kids that don't know each other and leave the week, best friends. And I think that's just the power of sport and unity. From Black kids to Jewish kids to Muslim kids to Arab kids. I mean, we had it all. In America, and I've seen the success stories, the exchange of Snapchats, the exchange of TikToks, and all social media accounts. So I think for us is really just showing that unity is possible. Also, just the educational components and the nutrition, financial literacy, and the racism, anti-Semitism that we teach is really just teaching kids, that there's more forms of racism than just the color of your skin. We have a lot of testimonials of kids that didn't know that, being racially biased, I mean, biased against someone's religion, someone's background, someone's face, shape, or size, is a form of racism. So it's really getting kids to really understand each other and educate them, that is really just about being a good human being, to be able to sit across from someone and have an uncomfortable conversation, which I think is very, very important nowadays, to get someone else's point of view.
For sure. And you've also been very vocal online since October 7th, really speaking up on behalf of Israel. Why did you think it was so important in your role to make sure that you spoke out?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, I got a complex background being both African American and Jewish, and I can relate, to both sides. But number two, I knew a lot of people were gonna, say things that never been there. I've been living there, even through, the difficulties. I've been there since 2020, and I'd be able to relate both the good and the bad, and really speak the truth. So for me, it was just about, being a positive light, being organic, being authentic about who I am and what I stand for, and really telling the truth about what's going on, in my opinion and my viewpoint. Not saying everything Israel does is right or wrong, but just expressing what I believe, and how people can relate to me.
Yeah, and what is one thing you wish that Americans or just people outside Israel in general understood about Israelis right now?
I think the biggest thing is understanding the situation. I think a lot of people just look at what's happening in Gaza and they don't see, the other side. They just, try to make it a racial thing. So I think it's just really understanding the full complexity of the issue. But I think for me, the most important thing I always tell people is to go see it for yourself. I think that's the best way for people to really understand and really, feel the moment. It's different when you're looking through a computer or watching on your phone, but if you're actually there or been there, you can actually express what's really happening. It's no different if I was in another country and something else was going there. I would tell people, if you can go see it, for yourself, and that would kind of answer all the questions that you would need.
Sure. Now, I assume that I know you're in the States now. Are you running camps while you're there in the States?
Yeah, so we just finished up our second year of summer camps. My mom, unfortunately, is dealing with health issues, so I've been back here in the States. But yeah, we're in full scaling mode. We're in expansion mode as well. We're actually haven't announced it yet, building another court in Ashkelon in the next couple of weeks. So just a lot of work that we're doing on and off the court to really just make an impact, for the community and try to make it a number one thing that a lot of people, when they see Jab Camp and Jab Camp logo, that we're trying to be a positive light in Israel. Funny story, one of my staff members called me the other day, and he was like, hey, I was in Netanya and I saw some kids with Jab Camp shirts on. So it's just cool to see kids really rock the swag and understand the mission and our focus on building bridges.
Sure. I mean, at your camp, from what I was reading about it, it's Jews, it's Muslims, it's Christians, it's blacks, it's white. It's really a little bit of everything. And there's something very powerful behind that, without question. What have you tried to teach these kids? I mean, do you feel like the message is coexistence, or is it another message?
I think it's all in one. Honestly, I think number one is coexistence. Obviously, it's a little bit different message from United States to Israel, but I think the most important thing I try to teach them is just be a good person. Just the little intangibles. Be kind. You never know what someone's dealing with. Be humble. Help others. Be able to be a person that can understand someone else's situation and be able to help them. So it's really for me, it's just honestly just being a good person. And I think a lot of kids understand that message regardless of race. And they can say, oh, well, he's right. You got to be a good person, be honest, be trustworthy. And I think that's just for us the core principles of what we kind of try to teach at Jab Camp. And the rest will take care of itself. We're dealing with, mostly young adults, kindergarten through eighth grade, so they're not really understanding the racial complexities yet, as much as they will learn in high school and college. But if we can teach them at an early age to just be a good person, be a good human being, make new friends that don't look like you. I think that's half the battle right there. So for us, it's been a success so far. I'm excited where the future holds, and it's a lot of work we got to get done, but I'm excited to continue to build.
And thinking of the future and what it will hold, there's so much talk right now about a possible peace deal, a real end to the war, not only in Gaza, but potentially even in the Middle East. I'm wondering, for you, Jared, what does peace mean? How do you define it?
For me, peace means you can look at someone that you don't agree with or your enemy and be able to have an uncomfortable conversation, be able to sit down with each other, break bread, and eventually shake each other's hand at the end and still be some type of friend, whether you agree or disagree. But at the end of the day, I think for peace for me is being able to hopefully, hug someone, that you don't like, be able to say, hey, listen, I like what you're doing, or we may not be friends, but I respect you and understand why you feel that way. So for me, it's really just being able to have uncomfortable conversation from a personal level. But my goal in the near future, I would hope is no more bombings, no more enemies that's close by, no one killing each other. Everybody wants peace. Everybody wants their kid to grow up and be able to live life fully, with no one or their neighbor trying to kill them. So I think that's the ultimate goal. But, I'm sure as many people feel in Israel and around the globe, we're, far from that.
Yeah. Now we're going to be wrapping up in just a moment. So I want to think about some final sentiments. When people finish watching this conversation, what do you hope they feel? What do you hope that they do as a result of hearing your vision?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people, in general, find a way to be a bridge. Find a way to, get back to your community because it's never is enough. There's never enough ways that you can't give back. And also try to build a bridge. Whether that's someone you don't like, someone that is your neighbor that you don't talk to. In Israel, there's an Arab that you don't typically like. find a way to have that uncomfortable conversation because you never know how far it can go. And that's something I really live by and something I really try to champion is, being able to break bread with someone, that I'm not used to breaking bread with and seeing how we have more similarities and differences. Because we're all, made in God's image. I always tell people my middle name is Aziel, which means God has created. And I always tell people that God has created all of us in his own image. We all weren't born to look alike. So, we can all, find common ground. That's most important.
That's beautiful sentiment for us to wrap up with today. Well, Jared Armstrong, a very professional basketball player, a player who's played in the United States, here in Israel, thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thanks so much for having me. Look forward to it.